What if the person you once loved, the one you betrayed, suddenly appeared in front of you? Only now, they're a beggar with 2 children, broken by life's cruelty. Could you face them? Could you face yourself? Obina's world is about to be shattered when he sees Ngozi again. The woman he left behind is still alive, but what she's become will haunt him forever. The streets of Lagos were always alive, a pulsating heartbeat of the city that never slept. Taxi horns blared, street vendors shouted their wares, and the rhythm of life never stopped. But for Obina it all felt distant. As he sat in the back of his sleek black SUV, gazing out of the tinted windows, the noise of the city barely registered. He was a millionaire now, powerful, successful, and in control. Yet, as the car moved slowly through the thick Lagos traffic, he felt an unusual restlessness. Today something felt different. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but the usual sense of dominance and control he felt in the city had suddenly vanished. His thoughts were elsewhere, distant. Then, just as his car passed a bustling market street, his eyes locked with a figure standing by the side of the road. It was only for a moment, fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to stop him cold. The woman was bent low, sitting on the pavement, covered in layers of tattered clothing. Her face was partially obscured by a scarf, but even through the grime and the years of hardship, Obina thought he saw something familiar in her eyes, something that struck him deep within. Who is she? The moment passed, but the question lingered in his mind. His pulse quickened. His SUV kept moving forward, but his gaze remained fixed on the woman. The world outside his window faded into a blur as his thoughts raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd seen those eyes before. That face. He had to know. His hand trembled as he reached for his phone to check his schedule. But his mind wasn't on work anymore. It was on her. He couldn't even explain why. It wasn't like he was the kind of man who felt a deep connection with people from the streets. He had built an empire, surrounded himself with power and wealth, and left his old life behind. He couldn't even remember the last time he looked at someone from the streets and thought about their story. But there was something in her gaze, something haunting, that pulled at him. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Obina pushed the thought to the back of his mind. After all, he had more important things to focus on, meetings, numbers, deals, but the nagging feeling refused to go away. It gnawed at him as the day wore on, each passing hour adding weight to the curiosity growing inside him. Who was she? Later that evening, Obina found himself tossing and turning in bed, unable to shake the image of the woman from his mind. He tried to sleep, but it felt as though someone was calling to him, demanding his attention. The next morning, Obina couldn't get her out of his thoughts. The image of her worn face and tired eyes continued to haunt him. She was still out there somewhere in Lagos, probably still struggling. What had happened to her? That evening, on a whim, he decided to go back to the same street. He couldn't explain why. He told himself it was just curiosity, nothing more, but deep down he knew it was something else, something deeper. Maybe it was guilt, or perhaps it was the lingering sense that he was missing something. Whatever it was, Obina couldn't ignore it any longer. He drove through the streets of Lagos again, his heart beating a little faster as he approached the area where he had seen her. His fingers gripped the steering wheel, a mix of excitement and dread coiling in his chest. What if she's still there? He thought. As his car slowed, he scanned the side of the road. The street was still busy, filled with people haggling, laughing, and shouting. But then, in the distance, he saw her. There she was, sitting under a small canopy. Her children were nearby, playing in the dirt, oblivious to the world around them. Obina's breath caught in his throat. It's her. The moment he recognized her, everything else faded. The noise of the city, the cars, the people. All of it disappeared as his heart began to race. Ngozi. The name hit him like a wave, crashing over him, taking him back to a time when things were simpler. When he was a young man, full of hope and dreams, and when Ngozi was the woman he thought he would spend his life with. She had been beautiful, kind, and full of promise. They had been inseparable, until life and the pressures of his family had torn them apart. Obina couldn't help but stare. Ngozi's once radiant beauty had been replaced by the wear of time and hardship. Her face, now gaunt, was a picture of resilience. The woman he once knew was gone, replaced by someone he barely recognized. But it was her eyes that struck him the hardest. They were still the same, deep, knowing, and filled with pain. And as she lifted her gaze and caught his eye, Obinna felt a pang of guilt twist inside him. It was like she had known all along that he would come back. For a moment, their gazes locked, and time seemed to stand still. In that instant, all the years, the choices, and the regrets came flooding back. He had abandoned her, left her alone to raise their child while he built his empire. His family had insisted it was for the best. They had said she wasn't the right woman for him. But the truth was, Obinna had listened to them. He had chosen his future over his heart. Now, standing in front of her, it felt like a cruel joke. The woman he had left behind was still alive, still struggling, and he had done nothing to help her. Obinna stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. He wanted to call out to her, to say something, anything, but the words were caught in his throat. He was too late. The years had passed. She had suffered in silence. And now, here she was, staring back at him, waiting for him to make a decision. What could he possibly say after all this time? And then, just as quickly as the moment had begun, it was over. Ngozi turned away, as if she had never seen him at all. Her children tugged at her sleeve, pulling her focus back to them. But Obinna was left standing there, paralyzed by the weight of his own guilt. The woman he had once loved, the woman he had abandoned, was still here, and she had never forgotten him. The night was quiet, almost too quiet for Lagos. Obinna sat alone in his penthouse, staring out of the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below him, the city pulsed with life, but inside, he felt like a man detached from his own reality. His luxurious world, the one he had spent years building, seemed insignificant in the face of the encounter with Ngozi. What had he become? The question gnawed at him as he poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring at the amber liquid as if it could offer him some kind of clarity. His life had been a series of calculated moves. Career advancement, wealth accumulation, the pursuit of status. But all of that felt hollow now. Obinna's mind kept drifting back to her, the woman he had once shared his life with. The memories flooded back in fragments. The way she laughed, the way she'd always supported him, even when his ambition overshadowed everything else. He remembered their shared dreams, their plans to build a future together. Yet, all of that had slipped through his fingers the moment he had let his family dictate his life. The truth stung. Obinna had abandoned her. He had chosen his future, his success, and left her behind without a second thought. But he had never expected this. He never thought that years later, he'd find her on the streets, broken and begging. Felt like fate had smacked him across the face. That's when his phone buzzed, snapping him out of his reverie. It was a message from his assistant. A meeting scheduled with a potential investor at 9 a.m. Can't be missed. Obinna stared at the message for a moment before tossing his phone aside. Nothing mattered anymore. He could cancel the meeting, he could blow off everything except one thing. Ngozi. His thoughts swirled in a whirlwind. He had to see her again. Not just to understand what had happened to her, but to confront the ghosts of his past. To face the consequences of his decisions. But what could he possibly say? After all these years, after everything that had transpired, was there anything left to say? The more he thought about it, the more certain he became. He couldn't let this go. He had to find her. The next day, Obinna found himself back on the same street. He drove slowly, his heart beating in his chest, as if every second felt heavier than the last. His eyes darted around, looking for her, half expecting that the moment he pulled up, she would disappear again. But then he saw her. She was sitting under the same canopy, her face drawn, her clothes tattered and faded. She wasn't alone this time. Her children were with her, sitting quietly at her feet, looking up at the world with wide eyes. Obinna's throat tightened. He stopped the car and got out, his legs feeling heavy as he walked towards her. With every step, the weight of the past pressed down on him. He wondered if she even recognized him anymore. After all, how could she? He was no longer the young man she had fallen in love with. Time had changed him. He was no longer the man she had known. He had been forged by ambition, success, and a world that had taught him to forget. As he stood in front of her, Ngozi looked up slowly. Her expression was unreadable, guarded. She had seen him approach, and yet, she didn't acknowledge his presence at first. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Obinna shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to begin. Finally, it was Ngozi who broke the silence. "What do you want?" Her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't used it much, but it was sharp, demanding, as if she'd been waiting for him to show up, for this moment to come. Her gaze never wavered from his face. Obinna flinched. Her words cut through him, sharper than he expected. It was the kind of reaction he had feared. Anger, hurt, and disappointment. And yet it was a reaction he had earned. He was the one who had left her. The one who had chosen a life of wealth and success over their shared dreams. I don't know," Obinna admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw you. He stopped himself, unsure how to continue. "I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what to do." Ngozi's eyes flickered with something like disbelief. But then she nodded slowly, as if accepting something unspoken between them. She didn't offer him the warmth he had once known. There was no recognition, no sign of the woman he had once loved. Instead, there was a quiet hardness in her eyes, as though time had molded her into something else entirely. "You think you can come back now?" Her words were laced with bitterness. "You think you can just walk back into my life after everything?" Obinna's chest tightened. "I never meant for things to turn out this way. You left me," Ngozi interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "You left me when I needed you the most, and now you want to come back? After all these years?" She gestured vaguely at herself, her tattered clothes, and the children playing quietly by her side. "This is what you left me with." Her words hit him like a slap, but Obinna didn't flinch. He deserved it. He had left her to struggle alone, and the pain in her eyes was a reflection of his own choices. A small child tugged at her sleeve, breaking the moment. The little boy, no more than 4, looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Mom, I'm hungry," he said, his voice small, fragile. Ngozi's expression softened immediately, and she turned her attention to the child, smoothing his hair. Obinna stood there, watching her with a strange sense of helplessness. This woman, this strong, proud woman, wasn't the same person he had known. And yet, she was the same. She had endured, survived, and now she was here, still fighting for her children. Her eyes met his again, but this time, there was something else there. Something he hadn't expected. "You can't change the past, Obinna," she said softly, her voice suddenly quiet. "You can't fix what's been broken." Obinna didn't know how to respond. All the things he wanted to say, apologies, explanations, promises, felt meaningless now. The damage was done. As he turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just leaving Ngozi behind. He was leaving a part of himself behind too, the part that had believed success could make him happy. And now, standing in front of the woman who had once been his world, Obinna realized that no amount of wealth could replace what he had lost. The air in Lagos was thick with humidity, and even the evening breeze felt heavy with unspoken words. Obinna sat in his car, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. His thoughts were a storm, swirling around the encounter with Ngozi. He hadn't expected the confrontation to go so painfully, so abruptly. But then again, what had he expected? That everything would be easily forgiven? That his wealth, his power, could somehow erase the scars of his abandonment? The truth hit him like a cold wave. He had destroyed what they once had. And now he was struggling to rebuild something that seemed too far gone. Obinna drove through the crowded streets of Lagos, his mind racing. He hadn't expected her to react with such bitterness. But who could blame her? She had been left alone, carrying the burden of their shared dreams on her shoulders, while he had chased wealth, thinking that it would bring him everything he needed. He couldn't shake the image of her, broken, but fierce. The way she had looked at him, like he was a stranger, as if the years they had spent together meant nothing to her anymore. And then the child. The little boy, his innocent eyes filled with hunger and need. What had happened to Ngozi? How had she ended up here, on the streets, with 2 children and a life so far removed from the woman he once knew? Obinna's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden ringing of his phone. He glanced at the screen, expecting it to be his assistant, reminding him of another meeting or task. But it wasn't his assistant. It was a number he didn't recognize. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello." Obinna's voice was strained, his emotions still raw from his conversation with Ngozi. "Mr. Obinna, it's me," a voice said, familiar yet distant. It was Ngozi. Obinna's heart skipped a beat. "Ngozi." His breath caught in his throat. I need to talk to you," she said quietly. "Can you meet me again tomorrow? I'll be at the same place." The weight of her words settled over him like a fog. She was willing to meet him again, after everything? Obinna's mind raced, torn between a sense of guilt and a longing to finally understand what had happened. He didn't know what he was hoping for. An apology, perhaps? Or a final closure? "I'll be there," Obinna said, his voice steady despite the emotions flooding through him. He hung up and sat there for a moment, staring at the phone in his hand. His mind was clouded, but he knew one thing for certain. He needed answers. He needed to understand what had gone wrong, and he needed to know why Ngozi had been left to suffer all these years. The following day, Obinna arrived at the spot Ngozi had mentioned, his heart pounding in his chest. He parked the car and walked toward the small street corner where he had seen her before. There she was, sitting under the canopy, looking even more exhausted than he remembered. Her children were still with her, sitting quietly at her feet. But this time something was different. There was a certain sense of urgency in the way she held herself, as if something had shifted inside of her. She was no longer the broken woman he had encountered the day before. There was a new strength in her, an edge that had been absent before. Obinna approached cautiously, his heart racing. "I'm here," he said softly, unsure of what else to say. Ngozi looked up at him, her face unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, she gestured for him to sit down beside her. "I'm glad you came," she said after a long pause, her voice still guarded. "I've been thinking about everything, about what happened to us." Obinna sat down, his eyes fixed on her face, waiting for her to continue. "I never wanted to leave you, Obinna," she began, her voice cracking slightly. "But after you left, I had no choice. I had to keep going, for the sake of our children. I did everything I could to survive. And yet, life has been so unfair. I'm not the same person I was back then." She paused, her eyes flickering with emotion. "And I don't think you are either." Obinna's throat tightened. He didn't know how to respond. The guilt weighed heavily on him. He had abandoned her, thinking his success would make everything better, but he hadn't known the cost. He hadn't known the toll it would take on her or on their future. "You don't know what it's like," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "The pain of watching your dreams die while you try to keep your children alive. The shame of having nothing when everyone around you has everything. You think you've lived a hard life, but you don't know what it's like to be invisible, to be forgotten." Obinna felt his chest tighten. This was the reality she had lived for years, a reality that he had chosen to ignore while he pursued his own ambitions. "I never meant to hurt you, Ngozi," he said, his voice raw with regret. "I was selfish. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought that chasing success would make everything better. But it didn't. It never did." Ngozi met his gaze, her eyes searching his face for something. An answer, an apology, maybe even redemption. But there was no easy fix for what had been broken between them. "I don't know what you want from me, Obinna," she said quietly. "You can't change the past. I can't change it either. I've spent so many years surviving, fighting to keep my children safe. I can't just forget everything that happened." "I don't want you to forget," Obinna said urgently. "I just want to understand." I want to help. I don't know how, but I have to try. For a moment, Ngozi was silent, as if weighing his words. Then she sighed deeply, a weary sound that spoke of years of pain and exhaustion. There's something you don't know, Obinna, she said softly, her eyes drifting away from his. Something I've kept hidden for a long time. Obinna leaned forward, his pulse quickening. What was she about to reveal? What is it, Ngozi? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked at him, her face unreadable. And then she spoke the words that would change everything. I never told you, but I have a secret about you, about us. And it's something that could destroy everything you've built.